Hello and welcome to Useful Idiots Monday Morning. I'm Katie Halper.
I'm Aaron Maté, and of course, this is the show where we watch the Sunday morning news show so that you don't have to. And wow, if you thought that we made fun of corporate Democrats too much, then this is not going to be the show for you, because there is so much making fun of corporate Democrats to do, because they just lost another election, the second in 8 years, to Donald J. Trump, the guy who most recently said they're eating the cats, they're eating the dogs, they're eating the sharks, and among
eating the sharks,
among other things. So now it's time for the postmortem before Trump and his gang come back to office. Now it's time for Democrats to reflect on what went wrong.
Right, and they're going to do it with all the insight with which they always do this, because the Dems are so good at their postmortems. Their postmorta, perhaps, is the Latin. I'm not sure. Yeah, don't worry, guys. They've learned all the lessons, as you'll see. And please do like the show, because, you know, we watched a lot of this material, and watching the Democrats do introspection is painful. So we really appreciate a like. Yeah, so should we just get to it and start, as always, with Meet the Press?
Let's do it.
Let's do it.
Good Sunday morning. President-elect Donald Trump is now returning to the White House after an historic political realignment. Mr. Trump swept all 7 battleground states after NBC News projected overnight that he won Arizona. He also tore down the Democratic blue wall and is poised to become the first Republican in 2 decades to win the national popular vote. President-elect Trump charged with plotting to overturn.
By the way, just a reminder of how incredibly messed up our electoral system is, our electoral college, acknowledging that what makes this unique is that the person who won the electoral college also won a popular vote. Like, that stands out. Like, wow, for unlike usually with Republicans, at least recently, there was actually popular will reflected in the electoral college.
Yeah, it's like a rare thing if democracy actually prevails.
Right, exactly.
The last election, now establishing himself as a transformational political force, reshaping American politics in his own image.
We made history for a reason tonight, and the reason is going to be just that. We overcame obstacles that nobody thought possible.
I think that we just witnessed the greatest political comeback in the history of the United States of America.
This decisive victory should shake the Democrat establishment to its core.
Now, that's true. I don't usually agree with Ted Cruz, but he's right. It should shake them to its core. And of course, the question is, what direction is it going to shake them into?
I mean, things are so shaken that we even agree with Ted Cruz for once. I mean,
exactly.
that's how shook this whole thing is. Right. And again, if you watch this show regularly, you'd have seen many pointers for Democrats on how they should have shaken things up. For example, not buying all in on the dumbest conspiracy theory of all time, that Trump was conspiring with Vladimir Putin and that Robert Mueller was going to lead him out of the White House in handcuffs. And then more recently, in the post-Trump era, in the Biden era, maybe it wasn't a good idea to like elevate Trump as a, you know, self-regarded victim of the establishment by prosecuting him with all these cases, including over classified documents. Remember that? Remember Doc Talk?
Doc Talk.
You know, and the campaign finance case in New York, where all of a sudden, like, you know, signing a document to like hide a hush money payment to Stormy Daniels became like a federal offense many times over, and focusing on that and making Trump the issue even when he was out of office. That was one tip that Democrats could, on top of course, not abandoning the working class and, you know, going even more populist than Joe Biden did, although Biden did to a certain extent, but not nearly as much as he could have and should have.
And how about not supporting a genocide, which the polls indicated very clearly was unpopular, and the polls indicated very clearly that supporting an arms embargo would have been popular and gained her support.
Yes, they did. And there are people who shall not be named who were in trying to get people to vote for Kamala, who said, like, look, if Kamala loses, there won't be any reflection on the genocide anyway, and Arabs and Muslims. Well, actually, there has been some as we'll see today, some examples of people acknowledging that Kamala's support for the genocide cost her at least Michigan, and therefore helped cost her the election.
And I want to read this comment, very important. So Daniel Darío Canales Gomez writes, from Mexico, I got to say the way Dems are analyzing the situation, it is quite racist, like Trump level racist. That's certainly true on social media. And it's disgusting. In fact, one woman who I screenshot literally tweeted like 2 tweets in a row. The first one was Kamala ran an amazing campaign. And the second one was literally the number for ICE so you could deport undocumented people. And we showed on Thursday Throwdown, we showed a Bakari Sellers clip where he did the kind of like polite version of that, where he's like, oh, it's going to be really interesting for those folks who voted third party and those folks who, you know, were upset about Kamala's position on Gaza. It'll be interesting to see how they react to what Trump does. So,
yeah, I mean, Joy Reid took the cake in this and saying, like, to Latino men, like, let's see how you feel when your mixed status family is broken up.
Yeah.
And you deserve, and basically saying like you deserve it.
Yeah. So disgusting.
Yes. Okay. Back to Meet the Press.
Although 1 second, I'll say at least she acknowledges how not all Latinos are a monolith, and that Latino is not synonymous with undocumented, unlike David Korn, who tweeted something like, maybe Latinos will see this differently when they start deporting them. As if like the vote, which is funny because that suggests that totally racist, xenophobic, and incorrect right-wing conspiracy theory that undocumented people are voting, which they're not. But again, for people like David Korn, they see like Latinos as one thing, and they don't understand that some here are like U.S. citizens. All right, let's go back to it.
New dawn of Republican leadership. With President Trump and J.D. Vance in the White House, we are going to advance an agenda that is an American agenda.
We're going to have the most aggressive first 100 days agenda that anybody's seen in a modern era.
Now, those victories powered by
Mike Johnson promising the most aggressive 100 days. And look, you know, that's nothing to laugh at. These people are reactionary. They're scary. You know, Trump's promise is going to do a mass deportation. They tried last time to repeal the Affordable Care Act. And even though, of course, there's a lot to criticize about the Affordable Care Act and that it sort of amounts to a subsidy of the for-profit healthcare system and the insurance companies that profit from it, it still expanded healthcare to millions of people. Right. And last time they were in office under Trump, they tried to repeal that. And I wonder if they're going to try something similar again. And Trump on the campaign trail, if you recall, when asked about like his supposed healthcare plan, he said something. It's still in development. Like we're still, you know, so they don't even have anything. And so, look, we can laugh at the corporate Democrats all day, and that's what we're here to do. But we have to be cognizant that the Republicans do represent something very scary, and they're promising to act on it with the mandate they have.
Right. And of course, we should remember that Mike Johnson is a born again evangelical who wants the rapture. So he wants.
Well, sure. Who doesn't?
Yeah. Yeah. Who doesn't these days?
Yeah.
Oh, by the way, 1 second. For the first time in my life, I met someone. I was in D.C. this week, Friday. I spoke at the Palestine Center's Jerusalem Fund about media bias and complicity in genocide. And a guy who I asked directions to, who worked for the train station, like Union Station, asked me what I was there for. We started chatting, and I told him for the conference. He asked me on what. I said Palestine, and then he was like, "Oh well, I hope the prophecy comes true." I was like, "Oh, okay, cool, interesting." I'd never met someone in real life who with that view that I knew of.
And by prophecy, he's referring to the rapture.
Right, the rapture. Yeah, sorry, I forgot that's the rapture. Yeah. He's rapture ready.
Frustration with exit polls showing 3/4 of voters feel dissatisfied or angry about the way things are going in the country. Nearly half of voters saying they strongly disapprove of President Biden. The share who say they've gotten worse off under the current administration, the highest ever in exit polls that have asked the question, surpassing the Great Recession. Vice President Kamala Harris conceding defeat.
Look, I am so proud of the race we ran and the way we ran it.
Why are you proud of the race you ran and the way you ran it? What is there to be proud of? That you didn't have anything that you said would be different from Joe Biden, except that you'd have Republicans in your cabinet that you trotted around with Liz Cheney, that you had no signature policy issue that at least anyone is aware of?
Mm-mm. Well, according to MSNBC, she did run a flawless campaign.
Oh, right. We
Remember,
went over
Joy
that.
Reid said that,
Yeah.
like, flawless campaign, because she got some celebrities like Taylor Swift to endorse her. So,
Aaron, you're really bearing the lead here. The important celebrity endorsement is Queen Latifah, who never endorses anyone, as Joyanne Reid points out.
yeah, well, again, as I think I said last week about that one, like, it's not as if Queen Latifah was going to endorse Donald Trump. So, again, why are we so impressed with these celebrities who like endorsing Kamala when they always endorse the liberal candidate anyway? But anyway, but
She got the
it was-
QL endorsement, QLE.
yes. But anyway, what's important is how MSNBC pundits feel, not how the country feels. And so let's just carry on as normal, and not do any self-reflection.
Now, I know folks are feeling and experiencing a range of emotions right now. I get it. But we accept the results of this election.
Democrat.
Okay, here's a question. I think Ali Abunimah first pointed this out, which is why, if Donald Trump is a fascist, why would you accept the results, and why would you hand over power peacefully?
Sounds like you're giving Donald Trump a patented fash pass.
Fash pass, yeah.
Yeah. You call him fash, you say he's Hitler, but then you lose the election, all of a sudden he gets a fash pass. It's weird. It doesn't make any sense.
Right.
If he's fash, don't give him a pass.
Yeah. Don't pass the baton.
Yeah. Don't pass to the fash.
Right.
But
yeah,
it
if
sounds
he's Hitler, you don't hand over power to Hitler.
you don't hand over to Hitler. No, you don't hand
or
over
Mussolini. Cheeto Mussolini,
yeah. I don't know if you remember that line from The Simpsons, like, you don't make friends with salad. You don't make friends with salad. That's from a famous Simpsons episode. You don't hand over to Hitler. You don't hand over to Hitler. Yeah.
Wilson, write this down for our compilation album.
It's going to be a big compilation album.
It's going to be
We have
great.
so many hits. Okay.
It's now grappling with their stunning loss and trying to figure out what went wrong.
Had the president gotten out sooner, there may have been other candidates in the race. Kamala, I think, still would have won, but she may have been stronger, having taken her case to the public sooner.
I mean, remember how well she did debating Biden when she called him an opponent of busing, school integration, basically. And she was correct to do that because he did oppose busing. And then was so savvy about this that she had, remember the night of the debate, she already had t-shirts made up ready to sell that said "that little girl was me," because she was talking about little girls who were bused. And then, of course, Stephen Colbert was like, well, you're now running with Joe Biden, who you basically called a segregationist. How is that possible? And of course, she famously said, it was a debate. It was a debate. So, she probably would have been interesting to see if there had been a primary, how she ran.
But listen, honestly, even though it's a little, it's a little awkward to see all this now infighting, which we never want to see. In general, because we want everyone to get along.
Right.
It is more refreshing to see at least there's some backstabbing going on publicly now, as opposed to 2016, when the immediate answer was Russia. This is all Russia's fault.
Right.
This is James Comey's fault. Let's not do any self-reflection. And now Dems are kind of turning on each other. And so it's like, at least that's healthier than blaming mythical Russian hackers and bots and James Comey.
Right. Although we'll see some of that from the media. No
Sure,
spoiler.
of course.
Yeah.
You still have to blame Russia a little bit, but
a little.
It's not landing as much as last time. That's for sure.
I think people never got to know Kamala Harris during the time she was in this campaign.
I would disagree with that. I think we got to know her pretty well. Like when, as you mentioned before, Katie, when she went on The View and they were like, hey, would you do anything differently than Joe Biden? Which is such a layup question. She's like, nope, can't think of anything. And then she says, I was in the room the whole time. So she was taking credit for all his policies, especially the Gaza genocide.
Right. Yep.
But here is Yusuf Favorite, Richie Torres. What does he have to say?
Goal is to win
By the way, one thing that's good to remember about this guy, he's a congressman representing the Bronx, and he represents, I believe, the poorest district in the entire country. And Adam Johnson of Citations Needed podcast has done the number crunching. I don't remember it, but the exact numbers, but the ratio with which he speaks about Israel versus poverty is like stunning. You would never know he's in one of the poorest districts because his focus is because he's an AIPAC shell. Okay.
Elections on Twitter, then you should embrace movements like defund the police. But if the goal is to win elections in the real world where it matters, then you have to appeal to working class people of color.
The party itself.
Okay.
By working class people of color, he means AIPAC, because that's
right. Yeah.
who he appeals to. And again, who is talking about defund the police this time?
Exactly.
Yeah, nobody.
Right.
Nobody.
Yeah. I mean, it's the most why does he feel comfortable lying through his teeth? I guess because he does it all the time. But that's just insane. It's like saying, well, if you want to win elections on Twitter, then you should run on seizing private property and the dictatorship of the proletariat. Well, right, but they didn't do that. So,
I mean, there were a lot of progressives who wanted to defund Israel and the genocide,
right.
but Kamala Harris rejected that, and in
Yep.
fact refused to say that she would do anything differently than Joe Biden. So he's attacking a complete straw man. And this is the thing now. It's like, everyone's painting Democrats as being like, too woke and all this,
Right.
and woke in like in the conventional meaning of the term, in which basically that's just like identity politics, not the original meaning of woke, which just means to get enlightened. But it wasn't like an identitarian focused campaign from like, and they make it out to be this like scapegoat. And I mean, there's room to criticize it to the extent it's used to basically not embrace, like class-based politics. Right. Fair enough. But it's also now used as a cudgel to avoid the fact that Democrats suffered because of things like the Gaza genocide, which of course Richie Torres is a fanatic supporter of.
Also, why should we listen to Richie Torres? Because if he were at all relevant, it would have made a difference that he had gone down to Michigan. But Kamala lost Michigan despite Richie Torres' appearance there.
Again, genius strategy from Democrats.
Oh my God, yeah.
To send Richie Torres and Bill Clinton to insult Arab Americans and Muslim voters and anybody who opposes the genocide.
Right.
Really, really, really smart. Also really smart for Kamala Harris to listen to her brother-in-law, Tony West, an executive at Uber, who told her to stop talking about like the corporate class and like taxing the wealthy because he thought that was a losing strategy. Really smart.
Yeah. And also, one other thing is, and this is important, a lot of people are saying like the identity politics thing was a extreme left thing. And people have been pointing out, identity politics in the exploitative sense of it and cynical sense of it was not a leftist thing. It was a liberal thing meant to cudgel the actual left. So meant to delegitimize Bernie Sanders and his supporters as a bunch of Bernie bros. And as Hillary Clinton famously said, is breaking up the banks going to end racism? No, which is talk about a straw man. Literally no one ever said that. And of course, breaking up the banks would help with racial economic disparity because of the way that the housing crisis happened.
The whole Bernie bros thing, when you think about it, it really just shows how much corporate Democrats hate their constituents and hate democracy. Because like, what is a Bernie bro? Like, putting aside that it's mythical, right? It's a scam to paint Bernie supporters as a bunch of like sexist, macho young men.
Right.
It's like but it's people who are actually excited about a candidate. Like that's what they really are, and are getting involved in their democracy, which is what voters are supposed to do if you care about democracy. And the neoliberals like, yeah, we don't want you in our party, so we're gonna assign a moniker to you that dismisses you and boils you down to just a bunch of like sexists who hate women, and that's why you support Bernie.
Yeah.
They really drove everyone away who could possibly be a part of their coalition.
Yeah.
Okay, more thoughts. Here is David Axelrod, former senior Obama advisor.
And I'll put in an article that I wrote about identity politics, by the way. We'll put in a link, and the Bernie Bro narrative, because it's really important to see exactly how that was manufactured. Okay.
Has increasingly become a smarty pants, suburban, college educated party.
I take issue sometimes with people.
Smarty pants, smarty pants party. Fair enough. That's some good reflection right there. We are the smarty pants party. We have to reflect on that. And hey, who can we thank for that one? Remember when Chuck Schumer was back in 2016? He bragged about this. He basically laid out the smarty pants suburban strategy, where he said, for every working class worker we lose in Wisconsin, we'll pick up 2 suburban, voters, and like moderate voters, quote unquote, in the suburbs of Pennsylvania. So, Chuck Schumer, that has got you a new election of Donald Trump and loss of the Senate. So, way to go.
Also, I want to give Connie a shout out. As a biracial woman, I really enjoy being called the Bernie Bro.
Saying, oh, the quote unquote left is the reason why this is happening. The ultimate problem is our ability to clearly and forthrightly advocate for an agenda that clearly champions the working class.
Joe Biden's decision to run for president again was a catastrophic mistake.
But we can all unite in knowing that Joe Biden would have lost and deserves a lot of blame for the situation that we're in.
The focus.
Did they use their voices ever to encourage Joe Biden to step down, I wonder?
Well, I mean, they actually were on the Kamala train relatively early. I mean, like, I don't actually remember what they were doing, say a year ago, but I remember after the first debate where, Biden had that meltdown.
Well,
then the Pod Save,
the
Pod Save guys were all over getting him to drop out. And they were riding high when he did. They were like, this is our moment. This is our time.
Right.
And now they're crashing down once again.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, the whole thing with Joe Biden was, he kind of ran suggesting he'd be a one-term president.
Yeah.
He just wanted to just defeat Donald Trump once, and then he'd like make way for a new generation. And it's not what went down. So he does deserve blame. Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely. But it's much bigger than Joe.
Now shifts to what President-elect Trump will do in his second term with a Republican Senate majority and presidential power expanded by the Supreme Court. At this hour, control of the House remains up for grabs with 19 races still uncalled. On the campaign trail, Mr. Trump made many promises to voters.
On day one, I will launch the largest deportation program of criminals in the history of America. If these companies don't make their products here in the USA, then they will be forced to pay a very stiff tariff. And I will cut your energy prices in half within 12 months. For people that are using IVF, which is fertilization.
I like the way he's reminding people what that means. It's really a note to self, so he remembers what it is, even though he calls himself the father of IVF.
We are the government is going to pay for it, or we're going to get or mandate your insurance company to pay for it. We will cut your taxes, end inflation, slash your prices, raise your wages, and bring thousands and thousands of factories back to America.
Well, if he's talking about raising wages, he's not talking about the minimum wage, because there's that famous clip, or it should have been famous,
right,
that we played on the show of when Trump did that stunt at a McDonald's drive-thru. And after he was done, handing out fries and burgers, he was asked by a reporter, "Hey, President Trump, do you support raising the minimum wage for the workers at places like this McDonald's?" And he didn't answer the question. He's like, "Yeah," he's like, "These are great people. These are great. It's a great business." So that to me was an answer. He does not support raising the minimum wage. So if he's talking about raising wages, he's not talking about people who make the minimum wage. He's talking about presumably his wealthy friends.
Right.
President Biden has invited President-elect Trump to the White House on Wednesday. A long-standing tradition Trump didn't extend to President Biden in 2020. I spoke to the president-elect on the phone 48 hours after his victory and asked him what he believes his mandate is. He told me it's to bring common sense back to the country. As for day one, he told me, "I think we have a lot of firsts," and brought up strengthening the border. I pressed him on the price tag of his mass deportation plan, which experts say could be in the billions. He told me, quote, It's not a question of price tag. Really, we have no choice. When people have killed and murdered, they're not staying here. There is no price tag. For more on all of this, I'm joined by national political correspondent Steve.
Okay, well, Donald J. Trump, another term. It's still pretty hard to imagine. Who would have thought, 4 years ago when he was inciting a riot, not an insurrection, I would say, but a riot on Capitol Hill, that he'd be back, in office. But that's how crazy this country is. And we're here for the postmortem. So here is
one thing I want to add is that one thing we do have to look forward to, by the way, is there will be opposition to Trump, unlike from liberals, unlike with Kamala Harris. So that's a silver lining of it. And Aaron, one public service announcement I have to make before we continue. Don't listen to me, listen to Soccer Papa. Speaking of PodSave, hit the like to smash PodSave. 3,300 people are watching and less than 900 likes. Guys, what is the deal? I mean, I need 1,000 at least, and that's being generous. I'm going to need 1,000 by the end of the next clip. Okay, we got there. Thank you. All right. And thank you, Soccer Papa, for being a proud, useful idiot patriot. Okay. Sorry, Aaron. Now I feel like we can truly move on and start healing the nation.
All right, let's hear from Bernie Sanders.
I want to start with the scathing response that you gave after the Democrats lost, Kamala Harris lost pretty big. You said the Democrats abandoned the working class. The chairman of the DNC called it straight up BS and said Joe Biden is the most pro-worker president of my lifetime. Former Speaker Nancy Pelosi.
By the way, saying Joe Biden is the most pro-labor president in my lifetime is a triply low bar. I mean, who else do we have who's pro-labor? Yeah, not a lot of people, but that's because depending on when your lifetime is, I mean, unless you were alive when LBJ was president, there's really not a lot of competition. Like, wow, he was more pro-labor than Ronald Reagan. Amazing.
She said she disagreed with you. She added, quote, Bernie Sanders has not won.
Okay, Nancy Pelosi. Yeah, Bernie Sanders has not won. I wonder why he hasn't won. Maybe it's because people like you and the DNC totally sabotaged the race, so he couldn't win. And a lot of people are saying now Bernie would have won, finally.
Do you stand by what you said?
Oh, absolutely. Look, Joe Biden is a friend of mine. I've been proud to work with him on an agenda which has been very strongly in favor of the working class. Biden promised to be the most progressive president since FDR. In many ways, on domestic issues, I think he kept his word. But here is the reality.
I mean, look, let's give credit where credit is due. Biden did put some people on the National Labor Relations Board that did strongly advocate for workers in ways that previous NLRB officials did not. And they fought for overtime. They raised the threshold, like the cap at which people can be eligible for certain benefits, including overtime. Like, they did do positive things. Right. And they could have done more, of course, but they didn't ultimately do enough. And they didn't do enough to communicate what they were doing. And that's just a fundamental problem. And of course, but Trump, his NLRB people were not pro-worker at all. Right. And Trump talked about helping working people. And he even got some unions not to endorse, but at least to stay neutral. And so we'll see if he'll do anything to reward those, union members who actually didn't endorse Kamala, if he feels any sort of if he feels that he owes them anything. But I doubt he will. And Biden should be recognized. It should be recognized that Biden did do some positive things, but clearly not enough.
All right. And he also sabotaged the railroad strike. Never forget that.
He did sabotage the railroad strike. Yes, he did. Yes, he did.
And he didn't do anything to get corporate money out of politics.
No, certainly not. No.
Right. No. Which inherently empowers the working class.
Class of this country is angry. Here is the reality. The working class of this country is angry, and they have a reason to be angry. We are living in an economy today, Donna, where the people on top are doing phenomenally well, while 60% of our people are living paycheck to paycheck. 25% of elderly people are trying to get by on $15,000 a year or less. We have the highest rate of childhood poverty of almost any major country on earth, and parents all over this country worry that their kids may have a lower standard of living than they do. That is the economic reality. And what Donald Trump did is provided an explanation. He went around, he said, I know you're angry, and the reason is that zillions of illegal immigrants are coming over, and they're eating your cats and dogs and everything else. That's the reason. Well, obviously, that is not the reason. The reason is, in my view, that we have an unprecedented level of corporate greed today, more income and wealth inequality, and people on top want it all. And we need an agenda that says to the working class, we're going to take on these powerful special interests and create an economy and a government that works for you. And by the way, that can't happen unless you get big money out of politics. We got to get rid of the Citizens United Supreme Court decision so billionaires do not continue to buy elections.
Yeah, could have also packed the court, by the way. Biden could have packed the court.
Which means what?
Which means adding, which is what FDR did, which is when you add judges to the Supreme Court. And that, of course, given how reactionary and awful the Supreme Court is, adding more judges, adding more Supreme Court judges under Biden would have really defanged the radical right power of the Supreme Court. And given that the Supreme Court is one of the biggest instruments for disempowering the working class, that would have been very important to do. But Biden cared more about, norms.
I mean, this is not an issue I've really thought much about. But then what if Trump comes in and he packs the court some more, and it just becomes like a nonstop court packing, like back and forth?
Yeah, but I think if you get ahead of it, then if you start doing it, then I think people realize, I guess it could be packed to infinity, but people realize that I think that you can't over pack. So you just kind of like, you get in there and you do it.
It would be funny if the court just kept growing, like
Yeah,
like
just
20,000 people.
That would be great, actually. It should be. It would be way more democratic.
Yeah.
And you know what Bernie is saying is really important, because I am reminded of the fact that, and Democrats don't understand this, people need accessible narratives. They need things, and they need a story, and they need a moral arc. And so what Trump does, as Bernie points out, is he says, blame these people, as Bernie just pointed out. And Bernie also said blame people, but the people Bernie blames obviously are the real villains. They're not vulnerable scapegoats. They're actually the people who are ruining this country. And phenomena like corporate greed and insurance companies and big pharma, and the billionaires. And people would always try to criticize Bernie because they compared him to Donald Trump. It's like, well, yeah, they both are saying you have the right to be angry. And if you think that you can defeat someone saying you have the right to be angry with basically saying things are okay, which is what Kamala said and what Hillary said, you're not going to get anywhere.
Oh yeah, there's even the editor of the New Republic, which is like a liberal magazine, just wrote an article basically saying that like the problem with the election was that people had the wrong perception that they're not doing well, right? And then he said and the reason they thought that is because of right-wing media. Right. It's because of right-wing media that people didn't recognize how wonderful the economy is, not their own material reality. And another pundit on MSNBC said that he said that high grocery prices, like the cost of eggs, he called it a low-level annoyance. And that low-level annoyance then feeds people to embrace fascism, basically. Right. So this is unfortunately the mentality of the liberal elite. They just have contempt for working people, and except for Bernie Sanders, aren't willing to talk about really their plight, and aren't willing to believe that their concerns about the economy come from a genuine place and not because they've been brainwashed by Trump and right-wing media.
Right. Someone in the comments is saying, okay, Katie, you learned that the party went too left. No, who the hell is saying that? How could you possibly listen to what Aaron or I are saying and think that? Sorry, I've gotten better about ignoring comments, but that's just so stupid. You know, they say there's no stupid questions, and there are, and there are definitely stupid comments. So that's one of them, yeah.
Well, let's hear a bit more of the spat between Nancy Pelosi and Bernie Sanders. So here's Bernie also appearing on Meet the Press.
As you know, your statement was met with some sharp reaction as well. This is what Speaker Emerita Nancy Pelosi had to say. Take a look. I'll get your reaction on the other side.
Bernie Sanders has not won. Let me.
Again, as I pointed out, I want to remind people that the reason Bernie Sanders has not won is because of people like Nancy Pelosi and the DNC putting their thumb on the scale.
With all due respect, and I have a great deal of respect for him, for what he stands for, but I don't respect him saying that the Democratic Party has abandoned the working class families.
Senator, how do you respond to Nancy Pelosi?
I'll tell you how to respond, Bernard, which he's not going to. You should say Nancy Pelosi is an out-of-touch elite
oligarch
worth tens of millions of dollars who literally profits off of her position in public office via her husband and his investments, which she supposedly has nothing to do with, to make a lot of money and to be able to afford, like, you know, double luxury freezers to hold all her ice cream and to brag about it during a pandemic.
And does insider trading.
100%. Yeah, that's how you respond, which of course Bernie's not going to, because he's a nice guy and wants to get along with these people because he works with them. But yeah, I mean, that's Nancy Pelosi represents the kind of coastal, really wealthy elitist that many voters have revolted against. And if the Democratic Party wants a future, they need to start thinking about new kinds of faces at the top. Okay, and also, now this is the tragedy of Bernard Sanders, because, yeah, I mean, he says all the right things, and he's right. Democrats abandon the working class. You know, working class people need to have their concerns addressed. But one thing that, and Bernie has never wavered from that message, but one thing that Bernie did do is cede to Republicans, including Trump, the lane of claiming to be anti-war. Because what did Bernie do every single time?
So disappointing.
Joe Biden put forward a proxy war funding bill to authorize tens of billions of dollars into the Ukraine proxy war, transferring money from, you know, ordinary people into military profiteers to funnel a proxy war to fuel a proxy war against Russia. Bernie, the whole squad, and every single other Democrat voted in lockstep every single time, approving more than $100 billion for what is now, everyone now acknowledges, is a disastrous proxy war in which Ukraine is losing. And Bernie took part in ceding that lane to Republicans who voted against it. And here is one Republican who's taking advantage of this, Bill Hagerty, a Republican of Tennessee. And listen to how he's speaking about Ukraine and how he's exploiting that to pretend as if Republicans care about working people.
Wait, did we finish Bernie, though? Bernard's response?
Well, we don't need to hear more of that because we've already, because he gave an answer in the previous clip.
A number of places where Washington has been out of touch with the American people. You mentioned Ukraine. I think that's a great example. The American people want sovereignty protected here in America before we spend our funds and resources protecting the sovereignty of another nation. You think about it. We've sent $175 billion of U.S. aid to Ukraine. That's more than 3 times the entire annual budget of the U.S. Marine Corps. I've been one of the few senators in the United States Senate who has voted and has opposed every cent of this Ukraine aid. I've been listening to the American people. We need to focus on our own issues first. And I've taken a lot of heat over it from Mitch McConnell.
And imagine if Bernie Sanders had said that from the start, rather than voting for more than $100 billion for a disastrous war. That's an area where he, along with every other Democrat, ceded a left-wing position, which is opposing war and spending money at home on social programs, to Republicans, which they're now claiming credit for and saying was a part of their victory in the election.
Right. I mean, it is a bipartisan issue. Historically, it's been more of bipartisan in terms of the population, in terms of voters. But historically, it has been a bit more Democrat than Republican, although there have been lots of Democrat hawks. But yes, you're right that this should not have been something that the Republican Party had a near monopoly on. I will give him credit for trying to, defund the Israel.
Bernie,
yes.
Yes.
Sorry, Bernie, yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Going back to the critique.
From the Wall Street Journal.
Yeah.
But this is what the American people spoke up and want us to do. We should never have been in Ukraine. It's a result of failed policies, failed energy policies, the
There's
failure
no U.S.
in Afghanistan.
presence in Ukraine. Are you
No,
talking
but
about
our funds. I'm talking about the vast amount of funds. Again, $175 billion is a tremendous amount. As I said, more than 3 times the budget of.
I mean, we were in Ukraine, right, with the coup. We had Victoria Nuland there physically.
Yeah,
We've
and
been
according
in
to the
there.
New York Times, after the coup of 2014, the CIA built up like 8 secret bases inside of Ukraine.
Yeah, right.
Which, and of course that happened under Trump as well, because while Democrats were pretending that Trump was a Russian agent, he was actually presiding over a really hawkish administration. Where Mike Pompeo, his Secretary of State and CIA director, he gave an order to the CIA basically that said, we're there to crush the Russians. That was Mike Pompeo's marching order. And the goal of crushing the Russians has led to Ukraine getting crushed in an invasion that we helped provoke, and U.S. taxpayers being swindled of tens of billions of dollars.
Right. So I think we can agree that we do have a presence there, ranging from the coup to the CIA bases along the border of Russia and in Ukraine. So yeah, but shockingly, Margaret Brennan probably doesn't know about that, or if she does, she doesn't care.
The U.S. Marine Corps. The American people want to focus on fixing our problems here. And with the borders collapse, with crime in the cities, we've got to pay attention to America.
So does that mean just cuts to U.S. military aid to all countries?
What it means is that we need to take a.
Heaven forbid we stop spending military aid, which means, subsidizing our own military industrial complex. That's what she really means. And look at the indignation at that, because, that's who helps run our society. And heaven forbid we don't subsidize military contractors anymore. Maybe spend some money on things at home, like infrastructure, helping the unhoused veterans, giving people health care. Heaven forbid consider that, which of course Republicans are not going to do. But if we had Democrats who weren't voting for things like the Ukraine proxy war, they could more forcefully advocate social spending too.
Right. And by the way, happy Veterans Day to everyone.
Yes. Happy Veterans Day to everyone celebrating.
Problematic holiday, which we can talk about another time. It was basically supposed to be an anti-war one. Not so much anymore.
Very deliberate focus on America first. And we need to be leading from a position of strength, Margaret. As I said, we would not be in this position. Now what we have is an administration that's allowing Russia to sell at a $60 a barrel cap. The argument they make that reduces Russia's profits. What it does actually is it subsidizes China to compete again unfairly against us with an energy cost advantage. And we keep Vladimir Putin fully funding this war in Ukraine.
All right, well, now he's giving his, his critique of how we haven't, how this is like strategically been a disaster for the U.S., which it has. I mean, Biden bragged about how he was going to turn the ruble into rubble. That hasn't happened. And now we'll see what Trump does. Trump last time was surrounded by neocons. He's already said that he's not going to bring Mike Pompeo and Nikki Haley back. That's good. But he also just announced that Elise Stefanik, who led a witch hunt in Congress against college students who protest genocide, that she will be his ambassador to the UN. So that's one neocon who's already put in a pretty key position. So we'll see. It'll be interesting. But here is a Biden White House aide named Megan Hayes belatedly acknowledging that, oh yeah, maybe it wasn't such a good idea for us to send all this money to Ukraine and to Israel rather than spending it at home. She spoke to MSNBC.
Unfounded or pointless now for some Democrats to blame Biden for Harris's loss because he didn't drop out sooner?
I think there's a lot of blame to go around. I think that there is a lot of woulda, coulda, shouldas that happened with the election starting from the primary or for, the primary season to when the president dropped out to the election results. But I don't think that does any good now. I think that the party needs to rebuild. I think we need to focus on where the electorate is at and where the future of the party goes, because Democrats are going to continue to lose elections if we don't listen to the electorate. So instead of pointing blame and fingers at each other, we should probably focus on what the American people want to see out of the Democratic Party so we can win elections.
So in your universe of coulda, woulda, shoulda, is there anything they could have done to win this election that you think they did not?
I honestly am not exactly sure. I think that the electorate gave a mandate of where they were, and I think that they didn't understand why we're sending money to Ukraine or to Israel, but we can't afford eggs and gas. And I think that we missed the mark on the messaging.
Okay, but see, what's interesting here is that she's not saying it doesn't make sense to do that. She's saying they didn't understand why we did it. And also, we missed the messaging mark. We missed the mark on the messaging. So it's not the policy that's wrong, according to this woman, to this Biden aide. It's just the messaging. Like, if only we'd explained to people why we needed to send money to arm Ukraine instead of helping people here, then maybe we would have won.
Yes, I would love to have seen Biden try to explain that to people. Like, he's like, the reason why we can't repair this road in your community or support building a factory or house the unhoused is because we need to go arm people in Ukraine so that they can die on the battlefield, so that hopefully some other people on the other side in Russia, so that they die too, and that Russia gets weakened as a result. And we need to go give Israel 2,000-pound bombs so they can destroy entire neighborhoods in Gaza and kill, according to recent figures, 70% of the death toll in Gaza are women and children. So I would have loved to have seen Joe Biden and Kamala Harris try to explain that one to normal people. And that's the problem. She can't see yet that actually the reason why they couldn't explain it is because you can't explain it, because it's such a unconscionable, ridiculous policy.
Right. Also, maybe it would have been good to listen to people on like genocide. Just another example that she doesn't bring up. Yeah.
All right. Well, here's someone responsible for the genocide and the Ukraine proxy war. His job title is National Security Advisor. I don't see what he did to actually help anyone's national security. In fact, I think he endangered it for everybody. He's the guy who, just a week before October 7th was bragging about how quiet the Middle East is.
Right.
And then had to edit an article in which he said the same thing in Foreign Affairs so he wouldn't be embarrassed with it being published. Jake Sullivan, he spoke to Face the Nation.
Go to Ukraine because we just heard from Senator Haggerty that worldview from that portion of the Republican Party right now. We know the war's expanding there. The North Korean troops seem to have entered the fight. You have all these adversaries all in on Russia winning there. What can you do in the remaining 70 days to sort of change what's happening on the ground or Trump-proof the strategy, so to speak?
Well, look, our approach remains the same as it's been for the last 2.5 years, which is to put Ukraine in the strongest possible position on the battlefield so that it is ultimately in the strongest possible position at the negotiating table.
Yeah, how's that going, Jake? How's that going?
Yeah.
Ukraine continues to lose territory. The U.S. is begging them to lower the age of conscription so that more young people are sent off to die. Ukraine is begging for Tomahawk missiles and for NATO membership, which they're not being given because Ukraine's being hung out to dry, exactly as was predicted on this show from the start, but which nobody wanted to listen to because there was so much proxy war fever. And of course, this idea that we're trying to help Ukraine be in the strongest negotiating position, that's undermined by the record, which shows that right after Russia invaded, there were negotiations at the negotiation table, and that Ukraine and Russia reached the outline of a deal. But the U.S., as Victoria Nuland recently admitted, told Ukraine not to accept it and refused to back Ukraine up with the terms it would need to accept it. And so now the result is, more than 2 years later, Ukraine is in ruins. And Jake Sullivan's still pretending that the policy is to help Ukraine be in the strongest position, when the actual policy, as he's previously admitted elsewhere, is to weaken Russia. And they have a few months left to do that before Trump takes over. And it's just going to be more carnage as a result. But this guy, I mean, the genocide obviously is one of the worst crimes in human history, I think. So, I mean, in terms of this administration's crimes, that's at the top. But a close second is dragging Ukraine into a disastrous proxy war and then leaving it out to dry. It's just such a tragedy. And he's still pretending as if he cares about Ukraine and as if he's a sensible. Anyway, it's very angering. But let's hear more.
Yeah.
And it should be up to Ukraine to decide for its own sovereignty and its own territorial integrity when and how it goes to the negotiating table.
Again, when Ukraine did go to the negotiating table, the U.S. told it that we're not going to back you up if you make a peace deal with Russia. and they encourage them to keep fighting. So that's a lie. And, if there's one thing, if, Trump has talked about increasing transparency in power, and if he actually was serious about that, one thing he could do is release documents showing what actually happened on the inside during this time. It would shed a lot of light.
And, we obviously sent Boris Johnson, Bojo, to visit Zelensky to tell him not to negotiate or reach a peace deal with Putin. That's how much we believe in Ukrainian sovereignty.
It should be up to the United States and a coalition of nations that we have built to continue to supply Ukraine with the means to defend itself against brutal Russian aggression.
You've got $6 billion in money left. That's already.
And President Biden made clear when President Zelensky was here in Washington a couple of months ago that we would spend all of the resources that were provided to us by the Congress on time and in full, meaning that by January 20th, we will have sent the full amount of resources and aid to Ukraine that Congress has authorized. And of course, President Biden will have the opportunity over the next 70 days to make the case to the Congress and to the incoming administration that the United States should not walk away from Ukraine, that walking away from Ukraine means more instability in Europe. And ultimately, as the Japanese Prime Minister said, if we walk away from Ukraine in Europe, the question about America's commitment to our allies in Asia will grow.
Do you mean President?
So again, the boomerang effect, like we have to keep fueling this proxy war in Ukraine, or else other countries are going to question whether or not we'll support them if we use them for a proxy war too.
Taiwan,
exactly.
Graham likes to point it. It's interesting when you just said the boomerang effect, Andrew. Andrew, why did I just call you Andrew? Aaron, because it makes me think of it's a little pun. Boomerang. This is a pretty, Cold War type of thinking. And that's the era of the boomers.
Boomerang.
Yeah, just like I'm identifying the boomer that's in the boomerang word. There's a little pun
I got
in
you.
there.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. All right.
It's the boomer angle.
Gotcha. The boomer angle. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Well, let's go to the next clip, because it wouldn't be a U.S. election without Russia being accused of meddling and brainwashing Americans into not voting for, the establishment's preferred candidate. And let's hear what Jake Sullivan has to say about that and whether or not Russia will be held to account for their interference in pristine American democracy. And by interference, they mean this time that Russia put out apparently some Russian operatives or Russian troll farms allegedly put out some fake videos that nobody saw, but which still, of course, represent a seismic threat to U.S. democracy.
Intelligence assessed that Russia favored Donald Trump in this election, that Russia interfered in a fairly dramatic and visible fashion with these fake videos. What consequence are they going to pay, if any, for doing that? Well,
first, let's not forget that we are currently helping Ukraine fight Russia in Ukraine in the most dramatic and full-throated way one could imagine. So
you hear that, Russia? The moment you started messing with us with those, Yosemite Sam memes and Jesus masturbation memes, you set yourself up to fight with us in Ukraine. So I love this because, one of my key arguments of the last 8 years is that Russiagate, this obsession with blaming Russia for the election and the deranged conspiracy theory that Putin was blackmailing Trump, was going to fuel tensions between the U.S. and Russia and even possibly lead to war. And Jake Sullivan is now drawing that direct connection. He's like, don't worry, everyone. We're punishing Russia for their memes by fighting them with Ukrainian bodies inside Ukraine.
We are already doing a substantial number of things to impose costs on Russia. We have also passed the most sweeping sanctions on Russia that we have seen against a major economy in the world at any point.
Senator Haggerty was saying it's Russia's doing fine even with those sanctions.
Well, first of all, you can see in many different ways, whether it's inflation in Russia, whether it's their ability over time to actually grow their economy, their technology, their capacity to invest in new sources of energy going down the line, that the picture for Russia looks increasingly bleak as time goes on, and that these sanctions are biting. They have not stopped, obviously, Russia from being able to carry out its military operations in Ukraine today, but they have painted a darker picture for Russia tomorrow.
Nice slip there. Yes, they paint a darker picture for Ukraine because Ukraine keeps losing territory and will never be the same, has lost hundreds of thousands of people. But, this answer reveals what his real motive was with this whole Ukraine war. It was to try to paint a dark picture for Russia, to harm its economy, which
Right.
is not actually working. Russia's been far more resilient than many people predicted, but he's actually admitting what his goal is. It's basically to, bait Russia into a war and then leave Russia weakened, which A, strategically is not working, and B, how is it anyone's interest to have this war, like to try to like cause inflation in another country? Like, is that what we want to do now, is to like make, because who suffers from inflation, as we know from our own country? It's ordinary people. So what he's
Yep.
bragging about is this goal of making it harder for ordinary Russians to live, because he wants to basically weaken their government, because he doesn't like that they're a deterrent to U.S. hegemony. That's what it all comes down to. All right, more Jake Sullivan, because there's still the whole
Sorry,
thing about,
guys.
the genocide he's fueling in Gaza, and what is he doing about that? Well, he's going to tell you very clearly nothing.
Mr. Netanyahu said he spoke to Donald Trump 3 times in the past few days. The Israeli president, Isaac Herzog's coming to the White House. That was just announced. What makes you think in these final days of the Biden administration that Benjamin Netanyahu would agree to peace in Gaza or agree to peace in Lebanon and not hold on to that political capital for the new president?
Prime Minister Netanyahu will make his decisions and he'll speak to his decisions. Here's what I see. First, in Gaza, it really today is not Israel that is standing in the way of a ceasefire and hostage deal. It is Hamas. Israel has said it's prepared to do a temporary ceasefire for a number of hostages and then try to build on that to get all of the hostages home.
Do you know what
Hamas
Senator
has said
Haggerty was
no.
talking about on that with Hamas?
I don't know about the particular statement he made. What I will tell you is whatever Hamas is saying publicly, what they are communicating to the mediators is no, we will not do a ceasefire and hostage deal at this time. So what we need to do is get the rest of the world to continue to increase pressure on Hamas to come to the table to do a deal in Gaza, because the Israeli government has said it's prepared to take a temporary step in that direction. And then when it comes to Lebanon, we have been actively engaged in discussions with the
He's such a liar.
He's
such
such
a,
a lying piece of crap.
It just came out recently that the Netanyahu government was caught basically leaking fake documents to make it look falsely as if Hamas was never going to agree to a ceasefire deal. And the takeaway from that for Israel was that, well, if Hamas will never agree to this deal, then we can just keep committing mass murder. And these documents were fake. It's a scandal now inside Israel. Of course, not discussed here, but it underscores how at every turn, Netanyahu has undermined a ceasefire deal. Netanyahu has added new conditions at every juncture, knowing that Hamas could not accept them. And the Biden administration has covered that up by basically painting these conditions as reasonable and as, joint U.S.-Israeli conditions. So U.S. taking ownership of Israel's deliberate efforts to undermine the ceasefire talks. And Jake Sullivan, of course, is completely covering that up.
Yep. And also a recent report in Ynet, which is not a leftist Israeli outlet, says basically that Netanyahu, Smotrich, and Ben-Gvir are letting the hostages die. The hostages die because they're not going to negotiate with Hamas, and they're going to keep attacking. And this Ynet, I'm just going to read one quote from that. As long as the negotiations are not restarted, the problem of the abductees, as I remember, a definite war target of the Israeli government, will be solved naturally and tragically.
Even before Israel invaded, Hamas offered to free all the captives if Israel agreed not to invade, and that got ignored along with many other overtures. So
right.
Jake Sullivan is going out just by lying through his teeth.
Yeah. And they want the hostages to die because, one, they don't want to negotiate with them, but also, according to the same Ynet article, it's basically going to then serve as an excuse when the hostages start dying to fully occupy and build settlements.
Israeli government. Those should remain behind closed doors. But we do believe that at some point, the Israeli government wants to do a deal that gets its citizens back home. I don't think it's doing that deal for American politics. I think it's doing that deal to try to secure Israel. And I expect that in the coming weeks, we will see progress in that direction.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Sure.
Right.
They've been
They
saying
really
this.
care about their
They've been saying
hostages.
this forever. Like, remember when Joe Biden, all those clips of him, like when he's getting ice cream. Remember when he got ice cream with Seth
Oh yeah.
Meyers? I forgot when that was. A long time ago. He's like, yeah, I think we can get a deal going
By Monday.
and he licks his ice cream cone. So this is the dance they're doing on their way out of office, barely pretending
Right.
to want a ceasefire deal while facilitating continued Israeli atrocities. Every single day you wake up and there's a new atrocity committed by Israel. It's unbelievable.
And remember, Israel has killed more of its own than saved.
More captives, yes.
More
Yes.
captives, yeah.
Okay. Well, listen, we alluded to this earlier. Remember some of those people who were saying you have to vote for Kamala? They were saying that if you don't, it won't matter anyway because let me just sneeze 1 second. Oh, it went away. There's like the argument was, okay, listen, if you don't vote for Kamala, if Trump wins, then anti-genocide voters are going to be blamed anyway, and there'll be no self-reflection at all. Whereas if they win, then we have a seat at the table, right? And maybe we can pressure them to end the genocide. Well, we're seeing now open discussions of how the genocide helped cost Kamala Harris the election. And here is Congressmember Ro Khanna.
You were a surrogate for Joe Biden. You were then a surrogate for Kamala Harris. And on this program, you defended both many times. One place you did create space was on the issue of Gaza. You said when you were going to college campuses, when you were talking to progressives, when you were talking to voters of color, not just Arabs and Muslims, you heard there was a problem here. Do you think that the numbers you saw, particularly in Michigan, vindicated your point of view? Or was there just a greater force at work?
I think she would have certainly won Michigan if there was more of a reckoning with the failures of policy on Gaza. And that wasn't my point of view. That was the point of view of a lot of people I was hearing on the ground. I also think beyond Michigan, this really was a concern for a lot of young people and a lot of progressives. Now, my hope is because President Trump got some of the votes for the Muslim and Arab community. I was just on a bipartisan Conel in Saudi Arabia. They have said that if the president wants a deal with Saudi Arabia, that the Palestinian state and a two-state solution has to be front and center. And I hope we can work towards actually doing that after the war.
I mean,
well, that's not gonna happen because
right.
Trump is a ally of Netanyahu, and no Israeli government wants a two-state solution because they want to keep stealing as much Palestinian land as they want because they feel a divine right to all that land, and so they want to keep expanding their settlements in the West Bank and maybe even bring settlers back to Gaza. But I think the key thing from this clip is that Ro Khanna is acknowledging what many Democrats and many Democratic Party stenographers wouldn't acknowledge, which is that the genocide in Gaza had a political cost, especially with young people, and Trump took advantage of that. Trump was given a huge gift by Kamala Harris and refusing to distance herself from Joe Biden on this, and he put out flyers in Michigan trying to appeal to people who oppose the genocide. There was like that. We've shown it, that flyer of Kamala Harris, a Trump flyer of Kamala Harris in front of the rubble of Gaza, and the caption says, "We did it, Joe."
Yeah, and also like the two-state solution, we know Israel's not going to do. But something that Biden could do, by the way, I heard this point made by Josh Paul, who resigned from the State Department. If people may remember, he has a British accent. In case that helps you figure out who he is. He resigned from the State Department, and at this conference I was at on Friday at the Palestine Center, he was asked what Biden could do that Trump couldn't reverse. And one thing he said is recognize Palestinian statehood and get the UN to do that. So Biden, if you want to clean up your legacy, even remotely, that's what you can do.
Okay, well, staying on this theme of the Gaza genocide, let's go back to Senator Bill Hagerty about his take on the prospects for a deal under President-elect Trump.
Have this mid-November deadline that the State Department and the Pentagon have set for Israel to improve the flow of aid to Gaza's 2 million residents. The UN says there is famine already or on the verge of famine. If it is found that Israel is indeed violating U.S. law, would you hold them accountable? Should there be consequences because they are recipients of U.S. aid?
Well, I've had huge disagreements with this administration in terms of how they've administered their entire policy.
But this is U.S. law. It's not just this administration.
Well,
it's humanitarian law.
I think what we've seen just break out again in the past 70-plus hours since President Trump won the election, Hamas is now looking for total peace. So I think the environment has totally changed.
This is really funny. So Hamas has basically responded to Trump's election by saying, we should have a peace deal. And MAGA people are pretending as if this is like been elicited by Trump, and that the fact that Trump won has shifted some Hamas position. Like this idea that Trump had that October 7th never would have happened under his watch because Hamas would have been too intimidated by Trump to launch an operation like that. And this could have furthers into that fantasy because Hamas put out a statement basically calling for peace, that this is some shift from Hamas.
Right. And we're going to look at that statement in a second, but this is interesting because let's keep playing the clip. Hold on. Oops, sorry.
They've announced they'd like to see peace. They'd like to see peace in Gaza. Let's see
You
where that leads.
You believe that there will be a hostage deal negotiated under President Trump?
I'd like to see what Hamas means by this statement, but it seems that the entire environment is shifting right now because they see new leadership coming in, and I'm encouraged by that, and I think we'll have new opportunities to. Again, President Trump was able to deliver peace through strength. I think that's on the way, and I'm optimistic what it might lead to.
Okay, so here's what's interesting. He's lying, right? Because as you just said, Aaron, he's making it seem like Hamas changed their position. Here is what actually was said by Hamas leadership to Newsweek. Let's take a look at this this Newsweek article. Okay, a senior Hamas official has called for an immediate. This is how the Newsweek article frames it. A senior Hamas official has called for an immediate end to Israel's war against the group in the Gaza Strip and a plan to achieve Palestinian statehood, in remarks shared with Newsweek in the wake of former Donald Trump's election victory. Now let's also show the headline, because we're going to see that, like Haggerty, they're pretending that this is about Hamas changing its position in response to Trump. No, next one. Hamas calls for immediate end to war after Trump election win. Okay, so like Haggerty, they're suggesting this is because of Trump win, right? Okay, now let's go and look at what the Hamas leadership actually said. The election of Trump as the 47th president of the USA is a private matter for the Americans, but Palestinians look forward to an immediate cessation of the aggression against our people, especially in Gaza, and look for assistance in achieving their legitimate rights of freedom, independence, and the establishment of their self-sovereign state with Jerusalem as its capital. Okay, and then let's finish the quote. The blind support for the Zionist entity, Israel, and its fascist government at the expense of the future of our people and the security and stability of the region must stop immediately. Okay, so again, nothing in this, despite the misleading headline and despite Trump's cheerleaders, like Haggerty's words, suggests that Hamas is doing anything different, right? It's not like they've changed their position because of Trump. They're not saying we want peace now and we didn't want peace before. They've been wanting to negotiate consistently. But I do think that this is a kind of still a very significant clip because it's interesting and shocking to hear anyone say anything about Hamas other than utter demonization. Like just saying that they want peace at all. We've never heard that on mainstream media.
If the Trump camp wants to now pretend as if Trump's victory is what is getting Hamas to accept a peace deal and then to actually use that to reach a peace deal, I am all for it. It'd be the ultimate troll move. Everyone, we can all say, yes, Mr. Trump, you did it. You did it.
I'm happy to
hey, go for it. But yeah, it is interesting. It's I mean, these people are Israel firsters, and I do expect that to be their policy. But if this rhetorical shift, which is being used to praise Trump, actually could lead, I mean, this is a Hail Mary here to an actual change in policy, that would be amazing. It would. If all of a sudden they could start talking to Hamas. And note what Hamas says that in that statement. It's actually nothing new. Hamas, and we've talked about this before many times on the show, yes, there's the original charter written in a refugee camp in the late 1980s under occupation. But Hamas in the years since has changed its stance. And there have been many opportunities to negotiate with Hamas and the other Palestinian leadership faction, Fatah, a Palestinian state with Jerusalem as its capital. And it's been the Israel and the U.S. that have blocked that because they don't want to have a peace deal
Right.
that respects minimal Palestinian rights, that accepts
Right.
a Palestinian state even on just 22% of what Israel stole from Palestinians. That was the Palestinian compromise. We'll take 22% of what you stole from us in Palestine. Hamas even has supported that. It's Israel and the U.S. that have not. And if Trump wants to break from that tradition, I'm all for it. I don't think he will, though.
Yeah. Well, okay, we started late and we want to leave you on a really hopeful note. So let's play let's play clip 11 because we've been suggesting that maybe the Democrats are out of touch, that they're refusing to look at how they can campaign better, govern better, but it looks like this Democrat in particular who worked for Kamala Harris is getting it.
71 days from Trump taking the oath of office. What is the most important thing that everybody is looking for? That is my question. I'll start with you.
Joe Biden's been a phenomenal president. He's lived up to so many of the promises he's made. There's one promise left that he could fulfill, being a transitional figure. He could resign the presidency in the next 30 days, make Kamala Harris the president of the United States.
Whoa.
It would absolve her from being able to from having to oversee the January 6th transition, right, of her own defeat. And it would make sure that it would dominate the news at a point where Democrats have to learn drama and transparency and doing things that the public want to see. Is the time. This is the moment for us to change the entire perspective of how Democrats
Okay, this
operate.
has now jumped from an internet meme to a Sunday morning show.
Jamal's out here right now.
Congratulations.
Season of House of Cards.
I thought you were going to say, what about the Supreme Court? That's also out there.
Well, the Supreme Court might happen. I don't know if it will, but I think this is something that's in Joe Biden's control. And if he did it, it would fulfill his last promise. It would give Kamala Harris the chance to be the 47th president of the United States of America. It would disrupt all of Donald Trump's paraphernalia, right? You have to rebrand everything. But she would, and it would make it easier for the next woman who runs for president to not have to worry about all the historical, weight of being the first.
I mean, you kind of can't make this up. How could Joe Biden make history in the next 71 days? He could end the war in Gaza. That would be great. End the genocide in Gaza. He could do something with Ukraine. He could do something with the unhoused. He could do something with climate change. No, the way the Democrats need to show that they have good ideas, need to show that they are willing to make history, is literally by letting Kamala Harris be president for 71 days.
It's so sad. It's just so sad. And of course, a major obstacle to all this is Joe Biden is probably pretty bitter towards all the people who forced him out of the race because he wanted in. He wanted to stay in. He was dragged out of the presidential ticket kicking and screaming. So is Joe Biden going to look past that grievance to let Kamala Harris be president symbolically for a few hours? I don't think so. I doubt it.
That's what your vision is for making history. I mean, it's such Dem brain, like they don't govern. They just do symbolism.
Yes, they do. Yes, they do. And obviously losing to Donald Trump for the second time hasn't shaken them up enough to drop that whole approach and to try to seek these symbolic moments that actually do nothing for real people.
Right. It would make no difference. Yeah. But it would be a perfect way actually for the Democrats to finish up this term by showing that they've learned nothing and doing the most Dem brain thing ever and a consultant driven thing ever.
Well, we look forward to, another 4 more years of covering all this madness and seeing how Democrats continue to, if they keep going in this direction, they're kind of finished as a party because Republicans right now have really seized this idea of like they're for the working class, even though their policies, of course, hurt the working class. Especially when it comes to workers' rights and wages. We'll see how many new tax cuts Trump tries to give to the ultra wealthy, and whether Democrats can actually form for the first time an effective opposition. And one tip is like this time, rather than focusing on things like a fictitious conspiracy between Trump and Russia, focus on Trump's actual policies, like the tax heist he did, where he transferred a lot of more money to the ultra wealthy. there was a bit of Democratic resistance to that, but the problem with that period was Democrats were far more focused on the Mueller investigation. So
Right.
I don't know, one of many lessons to learn. And certainly don't rely on special counsels like Jack Smith or Robert Mueller or other prosecutors to do your work for you. You know, try to actually mobilize people by organizing around issues that impact them, not through all these legal means that are predicated on a fantasy that Donald Trump's going to finally be put in jail and stopped by a judge somewhere. It's not going to happen.
It's ridiculous. By the way, Aaron and I have an announcement about something that we're doing this week. But before we do that, I want to read a few particularly generous super chats, and thank you everyone who super chatted. But A Deck says, when Hillary paid for the Steele dossier and claimed it was a legal expense, lawfare drives people to Donald J. Trump. Martha Allen of the great media Women in Press Foundation. Will the Democrats do anything in these last months and the genocide? Your talk about the media at the conference was important, Katie. Appreciation and thanks, Katie and Aaron. Well, we just answered that question, I think, Martha, which is that what they're going to do in the last months is something perhaps like as ambitious as naming Kamala Harris president. They're not going to do that either, but they certainly won't end the genocide, even though they could. ADX writes, ADEC writes, Ryan Grimm reports Tony West of Uber stopped Kamala Harris from talking about price gouging, as you referred to, Aaron. He is her bro-in-law who, with Plouffe, pushed Prop 22 in California, makes it illegal for gig workers to organize. They promised to take it to every state. Is KH going to? I don't know. Let's see. And KH, of course, is Kamala Harris, not Katie Halper. Never confuse the two. Let's see. Wadeworth, thank you for your generous super chat. And I think that's it. And again, thank you so much to everyone. Now, Aaron, should we tell people about what we're going to be doing this week?
Yes. Now, the only thing is I don't know if there are any tickets left.
Oh.
But if there are tickets left, we will have the link in the blurb. We are doing this fundraiser in Brooklyn. So this is a New York centric announcement.
Oh, yeah. Sorry. Yeah.
Sorry to everybody who's not in New York. If you're in Brooklyn on Wednesday, November 13th, Katie and I will be doing speaking at a fundraiser for the Middle East Children's Alliance, and it's at a great great Palestinian restaurant in Brooklyn called Ayat. There's the flyer, and the link will be in the blurb to the show, like the show notes. I don't know if there are still tickets left.
We'll find out.
Obviously, we're a hot ticket, the two of us. But if you can manage to snag a ticket, it costs $35, and that includes a dinner. We'd love to see you there and support a great cause. And Katie, anything you want to plug for the Katie Halper Show this week?
Oh yeah, it's going to be great. So I think we're going to start half an hour late. We're going to start 7:30 instead of 8, and we're going to have someone from PYM, the Palestine Youth Movement, and then we're going to have amazing guests, Thomas Frank and Matt Karp, talking about how the Dems dropped the ball. And they're both great. Thomas Frank, of course, of Listen Liberal. People love Thomas Frank. And of course, when he was criticizing the Republicans, he was on MSNBC all the time. But then once he started criticizing the Dems, not so much. And Matt Karp is a historian who writes about U.S. history. He's at Princeton, but he's also really good at looking at election results. So that'll be a great conversation.
All right. Well, that's been our show. UsefulIdiotspodcast.com is our website. Go there to support the show, get bonus content, and keep us going. We're very grateful to our whole audience. Thank you for tuning in. It's always wonderful to start the week with you, the best people in the world, listening to, making fun of some of the worst people in the world, all the people we see on corporate TV. So thanks so much for being here. We'll see you next time.
Bye, everyone.